Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Daybreak, Korea's two main parties have one more day to try and reach a compromise on the terms of a special bill aimed at investigating April's ferry disaster as the current parliamentary session ends on this Tuesday. The South Korean government says it will consider launching some major inter-Korean infrastructure projects if cross-border ties improve enough to make them feasible. Plus, following earlier denials, Liberia admits more than a dozen suspected Ebola patients are nowhere to be found after a health centre was looted last weekend. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, August 19th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you are tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning: after failing on Monday to agree on the terms of a special bill aimed at investigating the Sewol-ho ferry sinking, Korea's main rival parties only have today to find some common ground before the current parliamentary session ends. Floor leaders Wan-koo of the ruling Saenuri Party and Park Geun-hye of the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy will sit down on this Tuesday in a last-ditch effort to reach a compromise. The rival parties are in deadlock over the terms of the bill, especially disagreeing on how the investigative committee should be formed. Meanwhile, some family members of the victims of the ferry accident are continuing their hunger strike, demanding a full and impartial investigation into the disaster and a meeting with President Park Geun-hye. Now to the latest developments on the sunken ferry probe. Recently restored CCTV footage from the Sewol-ho ferry will be played in a courtroom on Friday in an effort to shed light on what caused the sinking. The local branch of the Gwangju District Court said on Monday that the footage taken from a video recorder that was submerged in the ferry for over 2 months will be played during a closed session with surviving victims and their lawyers present. Officials say the footage is believed to contain recordings in the moments before the vessel began to sink. The Sewol-ho ferry, carrying nearly 500 passengers and crew, capsized on the morning of April 16th, killing over 300 people. 10 people remain unaccounted for. Pope Francis is now safely back in the Vatican after wrapping up his historic 5-day trip to Korea on Monday. The Pope received a very warm welcome from the Korean people, many of whom praised him for his acts of love and compassion for the poor, suffering and socially marginalized. The Korean public was particularly charmed by the way he met and listened to the family members of the victims of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Our Park Ji-won reports.
Despite his busy 5-day schedule in Korea, the Pope's special love and care for the bereaved families of April's Sewol-ho ferry disaster was evident. His first encounter came last Friday in Daejeon, right before the Pope celebrated his first Mass with the Korean public. During the meeting, the families of the victims gave him a yellow ribbon, symbolizing the hope of the bereaved families, and the pontiff wore the ribbon right away.
We were heartbroken and deeply hurt by the accident. I really wanted to say thanks to the Pope for meeting us. When I saw him wearing the yellow ribbon during the Mass, I was really surprised. I felt renewed strength to go down this difficult path.
Pope Francis wrapped up the Mass with a special prayer for the victims.
In the sinking of the Sewol ferry.
On Saturday, during an open car parade before a beatification mass in Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square, Pope Francis got out of the car and walked towards family members where around 600 had been specially invited. He held hands with the father of a student victim who has been on hunger strike for about a month, urging the parliament to pass a special bill on the disaster to find out the exact cause of the sinking. The man gave the Pope a letter, and he put the letter into his pocket. And on Sunday, Pope Francis baptized another family member of the ferry victims, Lee Ho-jin, upon the request of Lee. It's extremely rare for the Pope to baptize a laity member, but the Pope Francis decided to do it to try and heal his wounded heart. The cross that Lee carried during a month-long pilgrimage over the country was delivered to the Pope, and he will take it back to the Vatican. The Pope's genuine listening not only consoled the hearts of the family members, but also the Korean public who witnessed his gentle love for the suffering families. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And before leaving Korea, Pope Francis conveyed one final message of peace and reconciliation. Specifically, the Pope called on the two Koreas to reject a mindset of suspicion and confrontation and find new paths to build peace. Our Connie Kim reports.
Pope Francis brought to a close his 5-day trip with a peace and reconciliation mass at Myeongdong Cathedral in Seoul. After entering the church, the Pope reached out to 7 women seated in the front who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. The pontiff took time to listen to them and adorned a badge that was given to him by one of the former sex slaves. In his address to the hundreds in attendance, Pope Francis conveyed a message of forgiveness. Referring to Korea, a nation divided for more than 60 years, the Pope called for the two Koreas to reunite, calling them brothers and sisters and members of the same family.
Let us pray then for the emergence of new opportunities for dialogue, encounters and the resolution of differences, for continued generosity in providing humanitarian assistance to those in need.
Pope Francis' final public event in Korea was attended by about 1,000 people. Reflecting the pontiff's great interest in the marginalized and poor, they ranged from North Korean defectors and immigrant workers to the survivors and bereaved families of victims from April's ferry disaster. President Park Geun-hye was also present, making it her 3rd meeting with the Pope during his Korea trip. Before the Mass at Myeongdong Cathedral, Pope Francis met with the leaders of other religious groups in Korea, including Buddhists and Protestants, and emphasized the importance of harmony. It's a message that Pope Francis built his visit to Korea around, the first by a pope in 25 years. He made it a point to reach out to those who are suffering and whose voices have gone silent within society, calling for changes and compassion. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea has once again reached out to North Korea, renewing its earlier proposal for high-level talks. On top of that, Seoul says it's willing to help repair North Korea's road and rail links if inter-Korean relations improve to an appropriate level. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports.
South Korea repeated its offer to North Korea on Monday for a round of high-level talks, saying it's willing to discuss any issue brought to the negotiating table.
If North Korea assumes a responsible stance, we will be willing to discuss any issue for improving inter-Korean ties. I once again urge North Korea to agree to the high-level talks as soon as possible.
If the offer is accepted, the possible lifting of South Korean sanctions against North Korea and the resumption of South Korean tours to Mount Kumgang could be discussed. While South Korea awaits North Korea's response, the Unification Ministry laid out detailed plans for a fresh inter-Korean infrastructure investment project in the report submitted to the National Assembly. These include reconstruction projects for the highway that connects the border town of Kaesong to Pyongyang and the railway that links Kaesong to the northern city of Sinuiju, both of which could begin as early as this year if inter-Korean relations improve. The report also said Seoul would be open to resuming trade and existing economic cooperation projects with the North and starting new ones, depending on the state of inter-Korean ties, hinting at a possible lifting of sanctions. Seoul imposed heavy economic sanctions on Pyongyang in 2010 after North Korea's torpedo attack on a South Korean warship. But in presenting the report to lawmakers on Monday, Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae ruled out the possibility of a unilateral lifting of the sanctions, saying the North must come to the negotiating table first to discuss the issue. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Now, in some economic news, Korea's trade volume with Japan has been slumping in recent months, largely due to the strength of the Korean won and Seoul's move to try and diversify its trading partnerships. Our Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
Trade volume between Korea and Japan has dropped to its lowest level this year since 2009, totaling $43 billion in the first half. Korea's exports to Japan, ranging from smartphones and semiconductors to steel, dropped more than 5% from the same period last year. The same goes for imports from Japan, which was reduced by 12%. The Korea International Trade Association attributes the overall drop in trade between the two countries to Japan's attempt to reduce its amount of imports in order to increase domestic demand.
The Japanese government raised its consumption taxes in April and is increasingly trying to nationalize its component and material industry after they were severely damaged by an earthquake disaster in March 2011.
Although Korea's trade deficit to Japan is shrinking, the researchers said the effect may not be entirely positive, since it's a result from a decrease in Korea's imports rather than an increase to its exports. He adds the trade volume between the two could drop even further as Korea is increasingly diversifying trade with other emerging economies. It's also being fueled by the low price competitiveness of Korean products to that of Japan's as the value of the Korean won continues to strengthen against the weakening Japanese yen. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
A new study has found that Korea's global companies are only a quarter as competitive as their Japanese counterparts. The study, released on Monday by the Federation of Korean Industries, looked at a variety of elements surrounding the two countries. For one example, Japan ranks number one with 231 exports in the global market share, and Korea just has 64 items. In regards to the number of Fortune 500 companies, Japan has 57, while Korea only has 17. And in the Thomson & Reuters Top 100 Global Innovators, there were 28 Japanese companies, while there were only 3 Korean firms. Now, the prolonged economic downturn in Korea is taking a heavy toll on local businesses, as the largest number of companies in over a decade saw their credit ratings downgraded in the first 6 months of this year. According to Korea Ratings on Monday, ratings for 32 businesses were lowered in the first half, which is 11 more than the same period last year. The number of firms that got a credit rating upgrade halved from a year earlier to 9. The agency also offered a grim projection for local conglomerates, as they accounted for 23 of the 24 companies forecast to be downgraded this year. Now, for months now, the government has been warning that Korea faces the very real danger of falling into a protracted slow growth trap. So who should shoulder the blame for this lackluster growth, the public or the private sector? Well, according to a new survey by the nation's biggest business players, the blame lies squarely on the National Assembly. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
A new survey suggests Korea's legislative branch is to blame for the stall in government efforts to spur growth. More than 80% of the nation's 30 biggest conglomerates surveyed by the Joseonilbo Daily said the National Assembly was stifling economic progress. They pointed to the delayed passage of major economic stimulus bills as the reason. More than half of the companies said they would expand investments and hire more employees once the related legislation passes. Earlier this month, Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan urged the parliament to pass 30 long-pending stimulus bills as soon as possible. 19 of them have been awaiting approval by the National Assembly for more than a year now. After Finance Minister Choi took office in mid-July, the government laid out a set of aggressive stimulus measures expressing concerns about the possibility of a long, slow growth trend resembling that of Japan.
If the bills aren't passed soon, experts are concerned the golden time to maintain recovery momentum could be missed. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has asked the executive chairman of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba to help Korea's small and mid-sized enterprises expand into the Chinese online market. The president made the request on Monday to Jack Ma during his third visit to Korea in just the past 4 months. Mr. Ma said he's making the frequent trips to Korea to boost cooperation. He also met with Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan, and the two agreed that the increased demand of Korean products in China presents an opportunity for both Korean companies and Alibaba. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Tuesday morning. For that, we turn, as always, to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news centre. Very good morning to you, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. The National Guard has been deployed in Ferguson, Missouri, after tensions between protesters and police came to a boil on Sunday night local time. State Governor Jay Nixon said the deployment came after a difficult and dangerous night of violence and looting, and added that the Guard would work with the State Highway Patrol in enforcing security. The governor strongly condemned the violent acts that had triggered a heavy police response, such as hurling Molotov cocktails and attempting to overrun the Unified Control Center. This as preliminary results from a private autopsy commissioned by Michael Brown's family found that the teen was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head and 4 times on his right arm. The results apparently contradict testimonies by eyewitnesses that Brown was shot in the back, as all the bullet wounds were to the front of his body. The lack of gunpowder residue also suggested the 18-year-old was not shot at close range. An earlier autopsy done by the St. Louis law enforcement was not made public. A third autopsy is slated to be conducted by a federal medical examiner. Officials in the West African state of Liberia are desperately searching for the Ebola patients who left their quarantine center when it was attacked by a group of club-wielding youths, yelling, "There is no Ebola." Liberia's information minister said 17 patients had returned to their communities, correcting earlier claims that all were transferred to another medical facility. Search teams through the West Point slum has so far failed produced results. Neighboring Guinea said it believed some of the sick Liberians had already crossed its border, officially closed some 10 days ago. The AFP reports ministers are considering sealing off the country's largest slum, home to some 75,000 people. In Iraq, Kurdish forces say they have gained full control of the Mosul Dam, which has been the center of a fierce battle with Islamic State militants for 2 days. Earlier, Iraq's defense ministry had said forces had liberated a large part of the Mosul Dam with the help of U.S. airstrikes. An Iraqi army spokesman said Iraqi and Kurdish forces hoisted the Iraqi flag over the hydroelectric dam, adding that at least 170 bombs were dismantled around the facility, though many more still remain. He said IS militants had fled to regions near the south of the complex, hiding in homes and offices on the premises. NATO is ready to respond with military force in the event of another Crimea-style infiltration. This according to NATO's Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, General Philip Breedlove, who said Article 5 would be applied if the aggression could be proved as carried out by an aggressor nation. The U.S. general added that the alliance is in the process of preparing for a new type of warfare, citing the Crimea precedent and the developments in eastern Ukraine.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off in the LPGA as Park Geun-hye won her second straight Wegmans LPGA Classic, winning her first tour major of the season. And her first tour major victory of the season could not be more dramatic as Brittany Lincecum, who had a single-stroke lead with 2 holes to go, part and bogey the next 2 holes to force a sudden death playoff hole with Park Geun-hye. And Park Geun-hye keeps her composure and finishes the sudden death playoff hole with a birdie while the American pars on the hole, giving the South Korean her second straight Wegmans title and her 5th major victory of her career. Meanwhile, moving over to the South Korean national football team as Lee Young-soo, the head of the technical committee, held a press conference on Monday to discuss the failed talks between the KFA and Bert Van Marwijk. But he also had a plan. With the September A matches against Venezuela and Uruguay coming up soon, Lee Young-soo announced that 43-year-old Shin Tae-yong will lead the national team until the technical committee can find another foreign coach to permanently lead the team. Shin coached the K-League Classic Seongnam-ira Chunma from 2008 to 2012 and will bring along with him Park Geun-hye and Kim Bong-soo as his assistant coaches. Well, Monday was certainly a busy day for the KFA as they also revealed the partial roster for the upcoming September friendlies against Venezuela and Uruguay. With the KFA naming just the overseas players who are set to join the team in September for now, 14 players were listed on the roster, and Son Heung-min and Lee Myung-ju, who were left off the Asian Games roster, were named as well. However, Park Ju-young, who is still without a club team, was left off the roster as the KFA plans to finalize the roster with a total of 25 players overall. Now more football, this time over to the U20 Women's World Cup as Korea faced off against France in the quarterfinals. Now, despite Korea putting up a great fight against the stronger French side, Lee So-dam could not convert a penalty chance in the 46th minute of the match as this match went into a penalty shootout after 120 minutes. And there, France squeezed through to the next round after beating Korea 4-3 on penalties. And we finish things off in baseball, not in the KBO, but in the 2014 Little League World Series, where the South Korean Little League team is being called the Miracle Team after coming back to beat Puerto Rico 8-5 in their second game. Now it's their second win this tournament as they hope to win their first Little League World Series since 1985. And with that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your weather updates. Well, the key words to describe the weather lately: rain, especially down south. Southern areas have been receiving heavy rainfall since Monday, while some areas have saw up to 300 millimeters of shower yesterday, but we have more rain to come. Up to 200 millimeters of more rain is expected for the east and southern parts of the peninsula, and 10 to 60 millimeters of precipitation is in store for the rest of the regions. So up to 40 millimeters of rain will fall over the Seoul and surrounding Gyeonggi regions today, and the daytime highs will be similar to yesterday, hovering in the mid-20s, and skies, of course, will stay under mostly overcast. And here are the readings for today. The morning low here in Seoul is starting out at 21, then the high in the capital and Daegu will rise to 25, while Gwangju and Busan will have daily highs of 26 and 27 respectively. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju should top out at 27 and Daejeon will peak at 25, while Dokdo should see highs of 23 and Mount Keungang reaches at 17. Well, it's gonna be another rainy one today, so be sure to have an umbrella handy, and it's going to be cool, so dress accordingly. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we have for you at this hour. We have plenty more news coming up, though. Korea Today is coming up in about 30 minutes' time. We'll be back throughout the day with many more news updates, and I'll be back at 10 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.